If there was one word that I believe describes the themes of the latest God of War, it would be fatherhood. All forms of it, the good and the bad. Expressions of the archetype that both develop the child or, conversely, prevent its growth. We see fathers act in many capacities: a teacher, an abuser, a friend. They can be absent, and in the case of the story's primary antagonist, a tyrant. Some of these expressions will be discussed in part 3 of this series that deals with the child archetype. For now, I want to focus on the two primary figures in the story, the teacher and the tyrant, Kratos and the All-Father Odin. While dealing with archetypes, dividing their characteristics into individual parts can be informative, but it also diminishes the whole. We tend to try and distill people down to a single bullet point. In this case, dividing the father into two polar opposites, the positive and the negative. But the shapeshifter understands that everything and everyone is multifaceted, constantly shifting between states of nature and psychology. As such, all of the individual aspects are merged together into one singular image, the Father Archetype, or the Ouroboric Father. When we get into the habit of dividing the whole into smaller characteristics, we inevitably categorize them into things we like and things we wish to avoid. People, however, are not that simple. Let's take Kratos, for example. A mixture of a caring father and a brutal monster. Both are true. As the shapeshifter suggests, he flits between both of these roles based upon the situation. That being said, not everyone resonates with all aspects of an archetype equally. Some are more of a monster than a teacher. Life experience and context-sensitive situations influence what part of the father our characters resonate with. When Atreus makes a poor decision, Kratos behaves in one way. When Atreus is in danger, Kratos behaves differently. For now, let's focus on defining what exactly the father archetype is in the first place. But first, let's recap the previous video. In part 1 of this series, we discussed the archetype of the mother as it applies to both Faye and Freya. I recommend going back and watching it before continuing. To recap quickly, however, the mother archetype acts as a protective bubble that shields the child from the world at large. Inside the womb, the child is fully under the mother's protection. After birth, the infant is helpless, unable to find food or defend itself. For several years, the child remains under her watchful eye to remain alive. It is the natural instinct of those resonating with the mother archetype to protect their child. However, there comes a point when this bubble must pop. The mother must allow the outside world to leak in her circle of protection, essentially forcing the child out to engage with the world. Upon learning of a prophecy dealing with her son's death, Freya refused to do this. She became a shadow aspect of the archetype, a devouring mother. Refusing to allow her child to deal with the world, we see where this led. Faye, on the other hand, ensured that with her death, the protection she had placed around the Wildwoods would shatter. The task she gave Kratos and Atreus with her ashes would force her son out into the world. One way to look at the two parent archetypes is that they are defined by different but complementary roles. If the mother protects the child from the world, then it is the father who prepares the child to deal with the world. Once the protection of the mother is gone, the child must become competent and learn to take care of themselves. The father is the medium that facilitates this journey. We see this in the opening scene of God of War 2018. As Atreus says farewell over his deceased mother, Kratos appears in the doorway. The boy exits the realm of the mother and is cast into the realm of the father. It is implied that Kratos has been largely absent from raising his son, but now that it is time for life and death, he enters to begin his role as mentor. This is a great word to describe the essence of the father archetype: mentor. As a noun, it means an experienced and trusted advisor. Using this definition, Mimir acts in a similar role to both Atreus and Kratos as well. As a verb, though, to mentor means to advise or to train someone, especially a younger, less experienced individual. The etymology of the name itself is a story of its own, tracking back to the poet Homer. When Odysseus of Ithaca left to the Trojan War, he left his son Telemachus under the supervision of a man named Mentor. Over the course of the story, the goddess Athena disguised herself as mentor to pass along wisdom and guidance, both to Telemachus and to Odysseus after he returned home. As mentioned in the Mother video, archetypes can express themselves in anyone as long as they serve the role the archetype is defined by. In this story, the goddess Athena resonates with the archetypal father while assuming the form of mentor. The name itself became synonymous with the act of passing knowledge on to and training one less capable. With that said, this archetype can express itself in many ways. Things like law, authority, discipline, rationality, etc. Each of these can have a positive and negative connotation and is reflected in different characters in God of War. For the purpose of this video, we will condense these down into two primary roles, the leader and the teacher. The dark side of a leader is a tyrant, one who abuses his or her position for personal gain and control over a populace. The dark side of a teacher is a manipulator, passing on only specific knowledge or doing so in a twisted manner for the sole purpose of controlling the minds of others, making them tools to be used in their game. If we examine Odin as a character, we see him resonate with the shadow aspect of the Father Archetype. He is emotionally abusive to and belittles Thor, manipulating his biggest weapon to remain docile and prevent him from gaining autonomy, only a tool to be used, enslaving his son to his desires instead of pushing him to become independent. Conversely, Odin is supportive, warm, and inviting to Atreus. The boy was desperate to stretch his wings and prove his worth. Odin facilitated this because by doing so, the boy willingly uses his talents to locate the mask shards. The underlying motivation was not genuine and served his wants, not the child's. Again, another manipulation for the purpose of control. When taking the form of Tyr, every word out of his mouth is one of pure pacifism, whispering to the group to roll over and accept Odin's authority without putting up a fight. Even in his brief encounter with Kratos in Svartalfheim, Odin hides behind Durlin, feigning weakness and timidness to avoid any conflict with the god of war, while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt and fear in his enemy. In all cases, his actions only serve to solidify his control. He engages with dark sides of the Father Archetype, a tyrant, a manipulator. By looking at Kratos as the positive side of the coin, we get a very different feel. He is hard around the edges for sure, but there is more purpose to his actions. As a leader, he protects and guides others through hard times. This is not a position he covets though. On the eve of war, he initially voices that Freya should be the general leading them into battle. With his son, a good portion of their dialogue involves passing along wisdom he has attained over the course of his life. His use of authority, law, and force is solely for the benefit of his son and others, not for the benefit of himself. This is the dividing line between the protagonist and antagonist of the game. The difference between a leader and a tyrant. The difference between a teacher and a manipulator. It comes down to whether the execution of that power is purely in one's self-interest or in the interest of others. If it is all for you and inflicts undue harm on others, it is corrupted. If it is for others' benefit and usually involves personal sacrifice, it is positive. The dichotomy in these two expressions of the father can certainly be seen in Odin and Kratos. Ultimately, however, their effect is best viewed through the lens of their children. Between Atreus and Thor, who do we think is more stable? One, by the end of the story, is considered self-sufficient. The other was trained to never think for himself and only act as commanded. Kratos teaches his child to be able to survive without him. Odin manipulates his child to be dependent upon him forever. A true mentor versus a controlling tyrant. With a better idea about the nature of this archetype under our belt, let's take a look at examples of the tyrant throughout not just God of War, but related mythology as well. This dynamic of a fractured father-son relationship is a reoccurring cycle that plays itself out in every era. If we go back in time, the protogenos Sky deity Uranus was the father of all titans, husband to Gaia. At their mother's direction, 4 of their sons acted as pillars to separate the earth and the sky. A 5th titan castrates Uranus with a sickle and casts the bloody remnants into the sea. The 5th titan was Kronos. Later, the titan learned of a prophecy. he would be overthrown by his child just as he overthrew his father. The tyrannical aspect of Kronos reared its head. Out of fear of the loss of control, he ate his children upon birth to ensure they could not rise against him. This is the dynamic we see over and over from now on. The Tyrannical Father fears anything that upsets its control, or in the mundane sense, perception of the world. These stories should always be interpreted as functions of human psychology and not literal stories about flesh and blood people. Everyone has their own way of dealing with life, some better than others. When acting in the role of the Father, we hope to pass along our skills and ideals to others. Sometimes, what the older generation has to pass on is something worth accepting. Their lived life experience and wisdom proves beneficial to the one in the role of the archetypal child. Sometimes, though, new things prove to be better and will naturally rise up. For the Father archetype, there are a few decisions. Accept it and change. Through use of reason, determine that the new is less beneficial than what has come before. Or become tyrannical and channel our inner Kronos and Odin to deny it completely. One consumes the next generation to maintain control. The other manipulates everyone to achieve the same goal. For Kronos, his actions were in vain. After watching him consume the other children, his wife, Rhea, bundled up rocks in a blanket and fed it to her husband. She then spirited away the infant Zeus to a cave on Mount Ida in Crete to be kept safe. Once he was grown, he played out the same family drama and led a war against his father, assuming control and establishing the next age of the Olympians. In the God of War backstory, we learned that an oracle prophesied a marked warrior would bring about the destruction of the Olympians. Rather than learning from his father's mistake, Zeus resonated with the tyrannical aspect and attempted to circumvent fate. He ordered Ares and Athena to abduct a marked Spartan named Deimos and gave him over to Thanatos. This is the personification of death in the Greek pantheon. This event would be the ultimate cause that led to his own demise. Deimos was the brother of Kratos, and his kidnapping set the Spartan on a path that concluded in the end of Olympus. The root motivation for these actions was the father afraid of being usurped by the child. But this isn't the end of it. Odin himself slew his great-grandfather Ymir to claim the title of Allfather. Both Kratos and Odin are reflections of each other in both backstory and current circumstances. They both slayed a father to gain control. They both learned that soon the wheel would turn again. Ragnarok is prophesied to be the end of the gods, including Odin, and Kratos witnessed an image in Jotunheim showing his own death. Both men begin the story in the same place, aware of their coming death. However, they approach the problem in different ways. One refuses to die and takes steps to avoid it. The other accepts his pending death and takes steps to ensure his child can survive without him. One attempts to control every fabric of reality in the hopes of changing his fate. The other releases control over to his child to prepare him for what's to come. If we throw someone into a labyrinthine cave system with zero preparation, they will likely get lost and perish. However, give them a map, a starting point, knowledge of where to find food and how to build a fire, the same person will survive to see the light of day. Knowledge is the ultimate gift this archetype can bestow. Let's ask ourselves, why is it that in a time of crisis we look to an elder for guidance? When we get sick, we look to a doctor. When in a time of war, we look to our leaders, desperately seeking assurance that the world is not ending. It is comforting to know that someone has the capability and wisdom to see us through dark times. Because, even if we don't admit it, there are always shortcomings to our own capabilities, and we seek an elder to inform us on what to do when a crisis inevitably emerges. Outside of the mother's protection, the world brings strife. The father archetype is what we look to in these dark times. But sooner or later, the parents will be gone, and the child is left in that dark cave, equipped only with what he or she picked up along the way. For a parent who takes their position seriously, death itself is not the scariest thing. It is leaving your child in a dangerous world unprepared. Another shadow aspect of the father is one of overprotectiveness. Similar to the devouring mother, the father has a devouring aspect. But instead of preventing the child from ever dealing with the world, The devouring father controls exactly how the child behaves within the world. It actively prevents the child from ever making mistakes by making all the decisions for them. By not taking a step back to see if the lessons imparted to the child were learned. In order to cross that barrier between childhood and adulthood, Atreus must be tested, to be allowed autonomy and act independent of his father. I've heard a critique that some fans didn't like the direction in Kratos when it came to his son, feeling he became a weaker parent. Rather than maintaining order over his son, he became more passive. Instead of reining the boy in and refusing to go along with his whims, Kratos increasingly permits the boy's decisions, for the good or the bad. While this is definitely a big change between the Kratos we know, I do not see this as a negative. Based upon the prophecy, he believes his time is short. So he has one true priority, to ensure that the child can survive without him. Kratos gives his son far more leash to see how he will behave, allowing the boy to make mistakes, to dwell with the consequences, teaching him on how not to freeze in the face of his own failures, and how to pick himself back up when he does. In the end, to grow stronger by allowing the boy to fail. On that note, Atreus' failures are numerous. He killed the bear, leaving the two cubs alone in the world. When the protection of the mother and the guidance of the father are removed prematurely, nature will take its course. Either these cubs will find a way out of the allegorical cave, or they will die. His pursuit of a mask shard leads him to free the Hellwolf Garm, who then goes on to wreak havoc upon the realms. His desire to rescue Tyr to help with Ragnarok is what allows Odin to enter the circle of confidants without even realizing it. All of their plans known to the enemy. This eventually causes a chain of events that leads to Ragnarok itself. Kratos of the first game would have put his foot down and refused to allow Atreus any freedom to make these mistakes, to impose his will upon the child, to become a tyrannical or devouring father, ensuring that his way of dealing with the world is the only thing that the child is permitted to do. Things certainly may have turned out better if this was the case. However, what would happen to the boy after his death? By allowing Atreus to make mistakes while under his watchful eye, a lesson can be taught at each misstep. It is said that we learn more from our failures than we do from our victories. Each one becomes a scar that we can look to, informing us on what not to do in the future. At the end of the day, the duty of anyone who occupies the role of the Father Archetype is to prepare another to survive the dangers of the world. Life is a muddy and chaotic place. Thousands of generations of people learned the hard way about how difficult it is. Over time, however, we learned how to make it easier. When we are a blank slate, born into a cave with no map. Those of us that are lucky have someone to take us under their wing and become our mentor. Whether that be our actual father, an older sibling, a strong mother, a teacher, or an acquaintance that acts as a father figure. In this way, the mistakes that led to the difficulties of the past can be avoided, and life can function easier for the next generation. Sometimes, though, if there is no one to fill this role in a child's life, or if the child rebels against them, they become like the two bear cubs. It will be a difficult life with no guarantee of success or happiness. For those that rebel, it is usually because of someone resonating with a corrupted version of this archetype. An Ouroboric father contains both positive and negative characteristics. If we have an absentee father, an abusive one, or a domineering parent, it may pollute how we see the archetype. We may look at someone who is legitimately trying to help us and reject them because they remind us of the tyrant, projecting this image onto anyone regardless of their motivations. If our father were like Odin and manipulated, schemed, and dominated us growing up, it is a natural response to reject the archetype as fully tyrannical. Just remember, it is not that the image of the father is corrupt. It is that different people resonate with the archetype in different ways, some for the good, and some for the bad. For any parents out there, I would like you all to keep this in mind. In the end, our time on this earth is limited. It is a better use of your time to facilitate your child's development into psychological adulthood rather than impede their growth from a desire to either maintain control or prevent them from making mistakes. Scraped knees are a fact of life. While the mother archetype may protect the child from falling in the first place, the father archetype helps the kid stand back up, patch up the wound, and continue moving forward. I'll end this essay off with a beautiful representation of all of these themes we discussed. The Song of the Sands is a side quest in Alfheim where Atreus and Kratos release a pair of creatures called Hafgufa. After doing so, the two dance in the sky and produce thousands of offspring before dying. Dialogue between the three describes what happens.
The adult's light fades as they pass it on to their offspring.
Hold on. Are you saying they have to die to have kids?
They don't have to, but the more light they give, the higher the chance of their offspring's survival.
All parents are supposed to die for their children?
It is what I would do.
We're freeing them only for them to die. It doesn't seem fair.
Life seldom is, but their sacrifice will allow their children to thrive.
If I were one of the children, I wouldn't want them to.
I know, son, but it is the only choice they can make. Whatever my future holds, know this, Atreus. I will always do what is best for your future. Even these two understand that there is little choice for the parent.
Using this metaphor, not all parents give their entire light over to their children. But the more one gives to prepare their child for a life without them, the greater the chance of survival. Whether that be physically, emotionally, or in regards to success. A tyrant would retain the light all for himself and let the children die, but a true father will give as much as needed to make sure the child is ready to take on the world. With the second of my God of War trilogy concluded, we have only one last topic to cover. We have discussed how the mother and father archetypes influence a child's development, but there is one more character in this equation that has a role as well: the child itself. Everyone is the hero in his or her own story. We are not leaves in the wind of archetypal forces. We have free will and have the freedom to react differently to the people in our lives, not something that is blindly programmed by our parents. Even if the path is laid out for us by a parental figure, it is up to us to actually walk it. If a dangerous path is given to us, we can always walk away and find a better one. However, failure to do either, for whatever reason, can lead to a state of eternal childhood, unable to overcome the threshold guardian and truly enter psychological adulthood. With that in mind, I'll see you all in the final episode of this series, The Eternal Child. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, please drop a like and subscribe to receive updates on future uploads. If you would like to help support the channel, a Patreon has been set up and the link is in the description below. Have a great day and peace be with you all.